Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Dynamic 365 Tech Talk. Today's topic will be an introduction to the Distributed Hybrid Topology for Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management. My name is AJ, and I'll be your moderator today. We're broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the Tech Talk Stack Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions during today's presentation, and there will be time at the end for further questions. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Aaron Murch, Senior R&D Solution Architect. Aaron, over to you.
Great, thank you, AJ. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. As AJ mentioned, this is the webinar on the introduction to the Distributed Hybrid Topology for Microsoft Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management. My name is Aaron Murch. I'm a member of the Fast Track team here at Microsoft. Along with me here today, I have some of my colleagues helping answer questions behind the scenes, but have also been instrumental in preparing this content that we'll be covering here today, not only from the product team responsible for delivering this functionality, but also other members of the Fast Track team. So at any time during the presentation, feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A panel, and this team will be working behind the scenes to help get those answered for you. Hopefully we also have some time for a Q&A session at the end of the session today as well. From an agenda perspective, this is what it looks like for today. First up, I'll be covering the series, or the Tech Talk series, that we plan on covering on this topic. Next would be the main benefits of the hybrid cloud topology, deployment options, architectural overview, a brief slide on licensing considerations, introduction to the workloads, a short inbound process demo with this functionality in our test systems, discussion on the upcoming roadmap, and then, as I mentioned, hopefully time for Q&A at the session as well. If everything goes as it did yesterday, we should have 15 to 20 minutes set aside for that Q&A session for everyone. So, as I mentioned, this is part of a series that we plan on having on this topic. This is the level 100 introductory session for the distributed hybrid topology. Next up will be a level 200 administration tech talk, where we'll get into further details around the installation and configuration, how the scale unit manager works, and then also additional details around workflows and additional demos around some additional business processes. And then we plan on having a level 300 technical deep dive session as well. As you can see here, this is specific session topics subject to change, but as of right now, these are our plans, and over the coming weeks, you should see the ability for you to join these upcoming sessions as well on this topic. So, main values of the distributed hybrid topology for supply chain management are listed here. So number one is that it offers scalability to the supply chain management solution. What the distributed hybrid topology allows us to do is take these workloads that are centralized on a single hub instance today. We can decentralize those out to scale units, and so that we can scale the solution. So the more scale units that you put into place, the additional processing power that you'd be offloading from that main hub unit into those scale units around the globe. Next is resiliency against connectivity issues. So we have solutions that offer benefits in both latency as well as connectivity issues. So if you have warehousing or manufacturing operations that have large latency to the main cloud or hub deployment of finance and operations or finance and supply chain management, we can offer scale solutions or scale operations more closely aligned to where those facilities may reside, as well as also allow you to potentially implement edge scale units as well, where the system components would be installed locally at the facilities to prevent against connectivity to the cloud issues. And then finally, availability across maintenance windows. So we now have the ability where you can take those workloads, like we mentioned, and they can either transact against your main hub deployment or against these scale units. And you have the ability to administer via that scale unit manager interface. You can determine where those workloads are going to transact against. And during maintenance windows, you can kind of shift those around to make sure that you would have encountered no downtime windows during these maintenance windows while you're making these changes. From a deployment options perspective, you can see here we offer 4 main deployment options at this point in time. The Enterprise Cloud Hub on the far left of this slide is what everyone would most likely be used to that's attending the call here today. So this would be a traditional, what we would consider a traditional Dynamics 365 finance and operations deployment. So all system components deployed in a one or more instances in a Microsoft Azure hosted environment where Microsoft is responsible for the administration and maintenance of these environments on your behalf. The new deployment options that we are introducing as part of these scale units is the operational cloud scale unit and then operational edge scale unit. So the cloud scale unit, as it sounds, it would be a scale unit that is deployed in a separate instance, a separate instance within an Azure data center, either within the same Azure data center or within a different Azure data center, but still hosted on the Azure cloud with administration and maintenance being performed by Microsoft on that scale unit. The edge scale unit would be where you would deploy those or install those server components on the customer at the customer site. So either at the facility, the warehouse or manufacturing facility that would actually be running the supply chain management solution, you would have server components installed there locally at the site and would be managed and maintained by the customer IT department. And then the final one that we have listed here would be what we call the tactical edge. And this is for customers that deploy the finance and supply chain management main application components via the local business data option, or the LBD as we call it here. And so those would be all on-premise components installed locally at the customer site. So both the finance and supply chain management main application components, as well as additional scale units installed at the customer locations as well. Here's a graphical representation of what this would look like and the overall migration or evolution of the functionality as it's being delivered here for the distributed hybrid topology. So you can see here again on the left-hand side of this slide, we have our main hub instance. So this would be, like I mentioned before, main application components for both finance and supply chain management, deployed either in the cloud or via the local business data option. And then what was first available from the solution was the ability to offer these cloud scale units. So as I mentioned previously, this is where you could install these scale units across the globe, potentially more closely aligned to your facilities. In this case, if you have latency concerns back to the main hub, you have the ability to deploy these workloads around the globe closer to where these transactions are happening to cut down on, let's say, those potential latency concerns that you're having. Or if you have resiliency or availability concerns as well, where the main reasons why we're seeing customers want to adopt this functionality. Recently, we've also now begun offering the edge scale units as well. So currently in preview, soon to be out of preview. So for the purposes of the call today, if you've not yet started your journey with these edge scale units, by the time that you'd have them in place, by all likelihood, this would be generally available for you. As you can mention here, what this would allow us for you to do is that it also the main benefit here is that it also covers those connectivity issues as well. So if you were to lose connectivity to that hub unit for any reason, you can move into an asynchronous pattern where those transactions would be getting queued up on that scale unit at the facility. And then once connectivity is restored to the hub unit, those would synchronize back over again. How these scale units end up working is via what we call workloads. So at this point in time, we have two main workloads available for you. We have a WES workload, which is our warehouse execution workloads, and we have our MES workloads, which is our manufacturing execution workloads. And you can see here via the WES workloads, you'd be using your warehouse mobile app to transact against those workloads. And we'd have our production floor execution interface transacting against those MES workloads, which again, transactions would be getting queued up on those scale units and then either synchronously or asynchronously, depending on connectivity, would be synchronizing those transaction updates over to that main hub. And you can see here, you could have multiple facilities, mix and match of these different workloads available on these scale units. From a hardware perspective, this is what this ends up looking like, depending on your deployment option that you choose. So you can see here, we have our main Azure regions, and this again would be our traditional deployment options, right? So finance operations deployed in an Azure data center hosted by Microsoft. Within these data centers, we now will be also having these edge zones available for these scale units at each of our various different data centers around the globe for customers that choose to deploy these scale units. And so either within that same data center as your hub, or as I mentioned, a global footprint across our data centers, you can also deploy these scale units in the cloud within Microsoft data centers around the globe. If you choose to move forward with any of the edge scale units or the tactical edge scenarios where you're deploying the hardware locally on the customer site, this would be just an example of some of the Microsoft recommended hardware that would need to be installed at those locations in order to support these edge scale units or tactical edge at the customer location. Just keep in mind for the edge scale units that this runs on top of the local business data infrastructure. So it's not quite as simple as just dropping in a single server in these locations. There's a little bit more involved with the setup of these operational edge scale units. And there is additional information in the resources of this slide deck, as well as we'll also be covering these details in the upcoming administration and technical deep dive sessions as well. So as a recap, when working within the Cloud Hub or Cloud and/or Edge scale units, it does require a loosely coupled architecture for the chosen business processes. And as I mentioned, it will be support both synchronous to asynchronous communication channels depending on which deployment option you choose. We have the concept of scale units and workloads. So the scale units are those physical environments hosting the workloads. So those are the servers, either in the cloud or on premise. And then we have workloads, which are defined and allocated to these scale units. One thing to note, I did mention that you can mix and match depending on whether it's, let's say, a warehouse facility or a manufacturing facility. If there is a facility that does both, you can deploy multiple workloads to those scale units. So you don't need multiple scale units, or it's not a one-for-one relationship. You can have multiple workloads on a single scale unit. And the other topic that I haven't mentioned that I wanted to bring up here is that we do introduce the concept of data ownership for this all to work correctly. So essentially, when the synchronization occurs, the scale units take ownership of that data from the hub. All updates, creates, deletes, etc. need to be run against that scale unit while it owns the data, which will then get synchronized back over to the hub once those data updates are completed. And so this is our way to prevent duplicate data or data issues from occurring in this distributed hybrid topology. So as I mentioned at the beginning, how this is set up and configured, and what we'll be covering in more detail in the administration tech talk on this topic, is the scale unit manager for Dynamics 365 supply chain management. So this is once the scale units are set up and installed, this is where you can go in and configure the systems, select those scale units that you'll be using, and then also choose those workloads that are going to be executed on those various different scale units. And so you can see here the listing of all, just a listing of the various different actions available on those scale units. As I mentioned, we'll also be getting into further details around each of these different activities that can be performed within the scale unit manager on our next tech talk. All right, the next question we typically get when introducing this concept to customers is, costs. Does it cost extra? What ends up changing to the standard supply chain management licensing that you potentially already have in place, right? So from a licensing perspective, there are SKUs now available for both cloud and edge scale units. So this is above and beyond the standard supply chain management licensing to deploy out these scale units. So this is, a per scale unit licensing model. The pricing is based on the transaction volume estimates. It is not user license based like traditional supply chain management. And then there are two options available. So each support a different number of transactions, but you can add additional capacity depending on your needs. So we have a basic cloud scale unit add-on, and then we have a standard cloud scale unit add-in. The basic covers, you can see here, 200,000 base transactions per tenant per month with an additional 10,000 additional capacity that can be added by purchasing these overage licenses. And here you can see the standard is 1.5 million transactions per tenant per month with an additional 100,000 transactions additional capacity that can be purchased. As always, review the latest licensing guides. So these are always, with anything Microsoft related and licensing, it is subject to change. So best to always review the latest licensing guide or speak to your reseller or Microsoft account teams if you have additional questions. One additional note that I wanted to make here is that the basic and the basic scale unit and overages must be purchased together, and the standard cloud scale unit and overages must be purchased together. So you cannot mix and match. Let's say you cannot purchase the basic cloud scale unit, but then purchase overages in the standard cloud. It is going to be basic to basic and standard to standard. Okay, so that covers our licensing. So now I'd like to get into further details around the workloads and what's available as of today within this framework. So from a manufacturing execution workload perspective, we can break down our activities into three main buckets, as you can see here, which is the planning phase, execution phase, and finalization stage. So in the planning phase, this would be all performed on those hub instances, as you can see here. So this would be all of your setups in the system. So this is item setups, bomb setups, route setups, etc. All of that still gets set up in the hub. We would still create orders, schedule orders, and release orders to the floor on the hub unit. It's at that point in time that we would trigger a synchronization to occur to that scale unit once that release to the floor completes. So once it's on the scale unit, now via the production floor execution interface, we can now transact against those orders on that scale unit. And here you can see we can perform actions such as clocking in or out of the jobs, starting jobs, reporting the output and the scrap, registering breaks, registering indirect activities, etc. here. Also to note here is that if you are using mixed reality guides, these also would work on these scale units. So if connectivity were to get lost, those would continue to work as well on these scale units. Once the job is completed, we'd then move into the finalization phase. Again, an automatic synchronization is triggered, and that is synchronized back up to the hub for final actions on those orders in the system. So things such as time corrections, updating of the inventory, paying overtime, approving time registrations, cost calculations, and accounting. So ending and calculating, or essentially ending those production orders, let's say as an example, would be all done on the hub units. In addition to those production floor interface, we also support the warehouse mobile app in manufacturing scenarios as well via our WES workload. So again, just like on the previous example, all planning phase activities are performed on the hub. So same set of steps to generate the orders and release to the floor. But now if there's material movements or inventory as part of these transactions, we also have the ability to perform these on the scale units as well. So you can see here as of 10/0/21, we now have the ability via the warehouse mobile app to report as finished these production orders, as well as perform finished good putaways. And in the near future, we are also planning the ability for material picking, consumption, and production starts from the warehouse mobile app as well. And then once these, again, just like on the last slide, once the orders are completed, finalization phase moves to the hub unit for those final calculations and costings. All right, so that covers what was available for manufacturing execution scenarios. Next, we're going to cover what's available with the warehousing executions. So just like manufacturing, planning and order taking is performed on the hubs. It is then, these orders would then be released to the warehouse, which creates a new document type within Dynamics 365 supply chain management called warehouse orders. And these are what gets synchronized over to the scale units for transactions to essentially transact against on these scale units and then synchronize back up to the hub when completed. We can break down these activities into three main sets of transactions. We have our inbound or receiving processes. We have our outbound or shipping processes, and then we have warehousing operations. And we have a slide on each of these. So as I mentioned, just like manufacturing execution, are enabling these processes and the system configurations and setups are all done on the hub. Orders flow into the hub unit. And then we have, for many of you, this would be a new concept. We have the concept of the releasing to warehouse for inbound to generate these warehouse orders to receive against. So just like if you're using our warehouse management module today, there's a release to warehouse function in order for work to get generated. on the inbound side, we also now have this release to warehouse concept to create these warehouse orders, which we also receive against then on these scale units. So in this process flow, which I also plan on demoing for you here shortly, what ends up happening is that you receive products and then you execute your work processing. So you receive and put away these goods within the warehouse. Once that put away process is complete, an automatic synchronization is triggered for the finalization of those cost update to those orders. So in my example that I'll be walking through is I'll have a purchase order, I will receive it, and I will put it away, and then that will generate the synchronization for, you know, final posting of product receipts, and then also receiving of the vendor invoices would all get posted on the hub unit. Outbound warehouse management processes, similar to the inbound and what you're used to today, most likely, right? So orders are still placed in the hub unit. We have the concept of a release to warehouse, which then would trigger the creation and the synchronization of these warehouse orders. But this is now where when we talk about scalability of the solution, this is where this really comes into play, is within these transaction flows here, right? So now where traditionally all warehouses you would be waiving and generating work on that centralized single hub instance, you now have the ability to do that waiving and work processing and work creation on distributed scale units around the globe. So you can see here from a scale unit perspective, you can do all of your planning for shipment consolidations, etc., load planning on the scale units. You can then generate your waves or work processing on that scale unit as well. And you can see here it includes load creation, allocations, replenishments, containerizations, all supported on these scale units at this point in time. We generate that work. You can go execute that work. So you can go pick that work that gets created, and then you can ship it. And included in those shipping operations, you can also post ship confirmations, send ASNs, and generate any of those various different shipping documents. And then again, same thing at the end of this process, automatic synchronization occurs so that you can do final costing updates and postings for packing slips, invoices, etc., against those orders. And then finally, we have our internal warehouse management processes. So these are things typically, you know, as you can see here, potentially not driven by work, such as inquiries on items, locations, or license plates, or executing inventory movements, adjusting in and out of inventory, as well as performing countings. Again, all available on a scale unit with or without connectivity to the centralized hub via the warehouse mobile app. Okay, it's at this point in time, as I mentioned, I'd like to show you just a brief demo of what this ends up looking like. So let me get logged back into my sessions here. One's still up. Okay, so you can see I have two different browsers running, each in different colors, just to signify the different hub or scale units that I'm working on. So you can see here, the green session is a hub instance, and I have two different windows open for this environment. And then in my Chrome browser here in the orange, this is my scale or spoke unit that we have listed here. So this is going to be, as I mentioned, so the hub is centrally deployed. This scale unit could either be cloud deployed or edge deployed at the local facility. So to start the process, as I mentioned, orders get placed into the hub unit. So what I'll do is, as I mentioned, this is a simple inbound transaction flow example. So I'm going to be using a purchase order for my demo. So I'll go ahead and create a new purchase order, select my vendor, hit OK to generate the purchase order. And so you can see that purchase order 250 was created for me. Next, I'm going to choose my item. So I'm going to choose item A0001, which is our HDMI cables. That gets added to my order. Next, I need to choose a site and warehouse. So within the warehouse setups is where I've chosen that this warehouse operates on a scale unit. So anything to this warehouse is going to get synchronized down to that scale unit automatically for me. So again, we're going to get into further details on how the behind the scenes mechanics of all this is going to work in our next Tech Talk. But just so you're aware, you know, if you do have multiple warehouses, some have scale units, some don't. That's what dictates the configuration of what would get synchronized down to those units. So I'm just going to set it for 10 pieces, and I'm just going to go ahead and save this. And then I'm going to go ahead and release it to the warehouse. So this is what we had talked about previously. Typically a step that you're probably not used to today, but for the purposes of these scale units, this is going to create those warehouse orders that we talked about. So if I go under my warehouse tab, I'm going to go ahead and just manually click this release to warehouse button. But just so you're aware, there are batch jobs that you can set up to be configured to schedule to run as well. So let's say nightly you want to run this job for everything that all of the purchase orders that are set to be received tomorrow. You can set up those batch jobs. It's just going to automatically execute on your behalf. So this is not a required manual step in the process. There are automatic batch jobs that can be configured and set up to run as well. Okay, so that completed successfully. So now if I go look in my other session here, how this ends up working is that we piggyback off of the CDX framework, which is a retail and commerce concept for those of you that are familiar. So this is the system that centrally is essentially managing the synchronization of the uploading and downloading of these transactions between the hub and scale units for us. So you can see here, if I go ahead and just, as I refresh this, my transactions have now showed up to be synchronized down to the scale unit. So if I just go ahead and synchronize this, so within a minute, this should be getting executed and completed. So I'll just continue to just kind of click refresh and wait for this. Essentially what will happen is I'll get this date applied and this message field will get filled in as soon as this completes. Okay, great. So you can see here for those last 3 transactions, that's now been filled in, which means that hopefully that scale unit, you can see here that it was applied to that scale unit. So it should now be over on that scale unit for me. So if I go ahead and switch back over to that orange scale, that Google Chrome browser with the orange, and I go to my all purchase order screens, as I mentioned, that was purchase order 250. So doing a refresh of my all purchase orders on that scale unit, I should hopefully now see this purchase order show up, which it has. So great. So now at this point in time, that purchase order that I entered on the hub has now been synchronized over and created on the scale unit. I'll go ahead and click into this. And you can see here, all of my same details have been copied over successfully. So I had the same item number, same quantity, everything that was placed in that hub unit has now made its way over to the scale unit. So it's now at this point in time that I could go ahead and execute against this purchase order. So let's say that this was getting received in. As we mentioned, your transaction, you can now transact against this purchase order on the scale unit via the Warehouse mobile app. How this ends up working is essentially you set up a connection string to this scale unit directly. So instead of pointing the Warehouse mobile devices to the hub, you point them to your scale units. So with this, those setups are already in place for me. So now I'm just going to go ahead and log in. And then I would go to my inbound processing main menu here, right? So the first thing that I would do is I'd receive my purchase order. So enter in my purchase order number. Next, I'd scan my item. Again, I'm not working on a handheld scanner, so I'm just going to be typing these in. One too many zeros, sorry. Let's try that again. All right, next I'd choose a quantity, which was 10. Check my values, confirm. Yes, PO number looks correct, item looks correct, quantity looks correct. I'll go ahead and hit OK. And so behind the scenes, what this should be doing is going ahead and registering in this purchase order and placing these items into my default receiving location within this warehouse, which is the RECV location. So now if I go ahead and look at the work details for this line, the other thing that should have happened is that I should have automatically generated that work to move those goods from my default inbound receiving locations and put it away to the stocking location defined for this item via the location profiles. So you can see here for this item that happens to be the floor 001 location, or FL 001. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this work ID because I'm going to need it on my next step here. So I'll copy that, cancel all of my receiving screen, and now what I would do is go to my purchase put away screen. And if you notice, you can do this in a single step, but for the purposes of this demo, I did want to show how the work gets created behind the scenes by doing this in a two-step process. So scan my work ID, so that's what I just copied here. You can see, yep, am I picking it up from the receiving location, putting it on this target license plate, which automatically got created for me. Item quantity, everything looks good, so I go ahead and click OK. If I want to consolidate or do multiple sets of work at a time, I could do that here. For my purposes, I'm just doing the one, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit done. And now it's telling me to go ahead and deliver this to my put location. Again, I don't have any of the confirmation screens turned on. This is just essentially, I don't need to scan anything additional here, right? All I have to do is push the OK button, and it's going to go ahead. And this is me telling the system that I have put this item away in that location of FL001. Again, I can see that my work completed successfully. So if I go ahead and minimize my warehouse mobile app, refresh my work screen here, I can see that it is now in a closed status and both work lines have been completed successfully, which is good. And what is also then going to happen is that this is going to automatically trigger the synchronization from that scale unit back up to the hub since these transactions have been completed. So if I go back into this upload manager, again, what I should see happen is that new sessions should be triggered to be synchronized. And I think in me talking, that I think it actually got synchronized over. Let me just try one more time to see if I get any new transactions showing up. Yeah, so I think with these time differences, I think it actually might have already been synchronized over. So let me just go ahead and switch back over to the purchase orders. And the way to check to see if the synchronization has been completed is I can go ahead and look at those warehouse order lines on this order to check status. So you can see here, this showed up blank, which is actually a good thing for me, right? Because I'm not showing any of these completed work lines. So if I go ahead and click on show completed, I can see that these warehouse order lines are now showing up as being completed, which is good. And also, if I go ahead and look at my inventory transactions against this purchase order line, I can see here that I now have a registered quantity of 10 against this purchase order. And as I previously mentioned, this is where I can go ahead and make my final updates to this purchase order, such as posting product receipts, posting the vendor invoices, etc., against this purchase order. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show you from a demo perspective. So I'll go ahead and switch back over to the presentation. All right, so the next topic that we wanted to cover here today would be the roadmap. So I spent quite a bit of time going over the workloads and what's available today. Here's what we have planned coming in the near future for this functionality as well. First one here is inbound transfer order receiving processes. Will be coming shortly. So as of right now, I showed you a purchase order example. We'd also be able to handle transfer order scenarios here soon on these scale units. Next would be if there are any manual packing stations or outbound sorting requirements as part of that outbound process flows. You would be able to execute those on the scale units coming soon. If you have integrations to the material handling automation systems, the MAX or MHAX functionality that we've had previous tech talks on, this would be supported. And then also additional processes for manufacturing operations via that warehouse mobile app, as I mentioned. So starting productions, consumption reporting, as well as raw material picking to those orders on the manufacturing perspective would be supported here soon. Handling variations, so quantity adjustments, reversing transactions, things of that nature within the process flows. If you have variations to what is expected, we'd be able to handle those soon on those scale units. And then also customer order returns. So the return order processing, our RMA order processing, will also be supported here soon. And so with that, we're essentially ready for questions at this point in time. So Zach, do you want to chime in here? Are there any questions that have been raised during the presentation so far?
Hey, Aaron. Yeah, let's give people some more time to put in questions into the Q&A panel. We did get a few questions, sort of broadly speaking, on customization of existing workloads, and quite a few questions on creating new workloads. So I guess we've been answering those questions, but I guess broadly speaking, we want to say that it is possible to customize the existing MES and WES workloads, and they're customized using X++. But at this time, at least, with this current release, it is not possible to create brand new workloads that will be coming in the next year. And then, Aaron, we do have a question for you. While you were doing the demo, somebody asked if you could perform all other transactions on the scale unit too. For example, could you create the purchase order there rather than on the hub, and then sort of have that synchronized back up? Can you talk through that and maybe the reason why that wouldn't work, for example?
Yeah, sure. Let me bring that up. So so let's just bring this diagram back up. So the short answer is no, you can't, right? So we do have to follow this standard inbound warehouse processing flow. So orders, the planning phase still will always be performed on the hub, and then we will execute that release to warehouse in order for those warehouse orders to be created. That's the mechanism that drives the synchronization between the hub and scale unit. So that is a required step to be performed on the hub, so that synchronization can occur.
Thanks, Aaron. And Aaron, do you know, is there a way to do sort of in the UI, I guess, not using the mobile app, can we receive like product receipt? Can we do a product receipt not using the mobile app?
As far as I know, that answer is no, but feel free, anyone else on the call, if I'm wrong, feel free to jump in. But again, it is the warehouse mobile app specific to execute those transactions against.
Yeah, that's correct. So currently, the warehousing app for that process is to support it, but the API is available for making that. So if we, for instance, take an example of reporting as finished, right? That's actually also a supported flow using a API call. So you can directly report as finished, which will only do the registration on the scale unit and do the receiving update and cost update on the hub following.
Great, thank you, Per.
All right, Aaron, I think that's probably the questions that we would answer live. We'll answer the rest sort of through the text. So I think we're probably good.
Okay, great. Thanks, Zach. Yeah, and as I mentioned at the beginning, this is meant to be the level 100 introductory tech talk. So if we didn't specifically address your questions on today's call, as I mentioned, we will be having the additional details on the administration as well as technical deep dive type questions as well in future tech talks on this functionality as well. So really the last thing I wanted to get covered here today is that as part of the slide deck that will be posted up along with today's presentation, there are additional resources for you as well. So we do have a Yammer group that is available. It's a private group, so you will have to request to be added, but you can certainly do so. So link here for those of you that want to take a screenshot. I also put in the full URL if you want early access to it. You can do so here via this link. And then I also included links to Microsoft Docs articles on this topic as well. So we already have some content published out there for you already. So scale units and distributed hybrid topology, how what warehouse orders are and how they work. And then I also have links to additional details on the edge scale unit scenarios. So that would be your on-premise deployment scenarios. So a link to the main landing page for on-premise deployments, which, as I mentioned previously, is the construct of which a scale unit is deployed on top of. And then also additional details on actual kind of step-by-step process for deploying of those edge scale units on those local business data or those on-premise solutions included here as well. So that's all I have for today. So thank you very much for joining, and I'll go ahead and turn things over to AJ.
Thank you so much, Aaron. I'd like to point everyone's attention to the Q&A panel. I've just dropped a short survey. We'd love to get your participation on. Just try to understand what you liked about today's session and anything that you'd like to see in the future. As a reminder, the recording for today's session will be available on Tech Talks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. I'd like to extend a thank you to our presenter, Aaron, and his team, and you, the audience, for joining us today. This concludes today's event.